You've entered Bookstorm. Your favorite authors are here to dive down deep into their best-selling books. Stay tuned to brave the storm.
Well, welcome back, listeners. We are just thrilled that you're here. You're tuning in from 102 countries and territories in all 50 states. I'm Kristen Civiletto, one of your co-hosts, and with me is Julia Rose. And we know why you're tuning in. It is because we are bringing you the very best authors that are writing today. And today is no exception. We're just thrilled because we have internationally best-selling author Clemence Michallon. Welcome, Clemence.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the intro and thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, we're very excited because we're here to talk about your new release, Our Last Resort, which has a super cool cover. I just love this book. I wanted to read it just because, of course, the beautiful cover. But I want to tell our listeners just a little bit about your background. It's very interesting, and we know that they love to hear those tidbits about, what brought you to writing and what you did before. Now, in your situation, you are both an author and a journalist, and many people have followed your writing because you have been writing for, let's see, the New York Times Book Review, the Time Magazine, Cosmopolitan UK, and many more, which is really cool. How many years were you in the journalism field?
Thank you. I was in journalism full time for a decade. I
Okay.
graduated from grad school in 2015, but before that, there's internships and training. So really, I had been working for a long time, and I went freelance actually a bit more than a year ago, I'm realizing.
Yeah. And I remember from interviews that you've done in the past, you've been writing basically since you were 7 and uh, uh, and pretty continuously, which is neat. Now, a lot
Yes.
of people also know you because of a book that you had in 2023. And that book, The Quiet Tenant, was shortlisted for the Hammett Prize. It's a New York Times Best Crime Novel of the Year, a GMA Buzz Pick, and that's very exciting. So we just wanted to acknowledge what a cool background you have, and you certainly bring all that to bear in this story, the one that we're here to talk about today.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I agree with you on the cover of Our Last Resort. I think it's so good. I can say it because I did not design it. My very talented team did, and I thought they did such a great job.
They did. It's beautiful. So I would love to give our listeners some background into the story. I won't give away any spoilers, and if there's anything you want to add at the end, please do. So Frida and Gabriel arrive seeking a fresh start at the stunning Era Hotel in the secluded desert of Escalante, Utah. Once so close they were able to finish each other's sentences, they've grown apart in recent years after a sudden tragedy. Now, at the resort, they're ready to reconnect. It all feels like paradise until the dead body of a young woman who was vacationing at the Era with her powerful, much older husband is discovered. When the local police arrive and suspicion quickly falls on Gabriel, Frida's forced to revisit memories of their upbringing in a cult in upstate New York, their dramatic escape, and the scandal that followed. Frida's belief in Gabriel's innocence never wavered at the time, but now even she can't ignore the mounting evidence against him. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that's a really good summary, actually, and you read it so well. And yeah, no, that's pretty thorough. I guess I would add the book is told in dual timelines, and one of them is Gabriel and Frida's childhood in the cult. So that one spans many years, and then the contemporary timeline is the murder investigation and its consequences in the hotel, and that timeline spans days. And like everything when you're writing a novel, I undertook it with a wonderful amount of naivete, which I think is always needed when you're starting a project. And I was like, yeah, do dual timelines. It's gonna be cool. And it turns out it's really hard, but it's really fun. But it was so I love getting to know my characters, and this was such a good way to do it because then you get to know them as children. You get to sort of make sure these children will grow into these adults, and likewise that these adults would grow out of these children and that set of circumstances. So it was a really interesting exercise.
I actually love the dual timelines, and I loved the flashbacks to their cult life because we're both located in upstate New York. So it was nice to, you know, read a little a cameo from New York, but also that just it really added so much juicy context to the story. So that was an excellent choice.
I think I feel about upstate New York the way Stephen King feels about Maine. It always has to be in there somehow. It's just such an atmospheric place. And I've spent a lot of time just near the Hudson River, basically, you know, either upstate or, I mean, and upstate depends on where people live, right? Like upstate for someone who's in Albany is not upstate for someone who's in the city. It's not the same area, but I've spent a lot of time in New York State in various towns, and I just love setting at least parts of my books there.
Oh, that's awesome. So, speaking of the natural world, that it played a really important role in your story. So, it's not only the backdrop for many of the plot points, but it also seemed to mirror what was happening to a lot of the characters. So, one example was there was a wounded fox that was making forays out from its den, and that felt like those escapes that Frida and Gabriel were making as teens. So we also see wounded people marring the natural world through bloodshed, jealousy, narcissism, and it really felt like a violation of the natural order of things. Can you talk about that a little bit? Was that intentional?
First of all, that is such a good question. I just wanted to acknowledge, like, it's such a beautiful, well-observed question. And spoiler alert, I got to peek at the questions before this, and I was blown away. They are amazing questions, and like questions that come from people who've read the book so closely and received it so generously and on its own terms and understood what it was trying to do. So thank you so much, because this is just it's always an extraordinary feeling. So to go back to your excellent question, there is completely a theme within this book about the natural world and the order of things, and also the idea of violence and pain and their ripple effect. And what I found so fascinating about your question is that it illustrated to me how so much of coming up with story and atmosphere and themes, it happens in two layers. There's the conscious level, and then there's everything else that just kind of finds its way into the writing. And the parallels you just pointed out for me were the latter. I didn't think about them super consciously, but when you stay with a story for me, it was 2, 3 years, that architecture starts to build itself because you're with it, and not everything happens deliberately. And in this case, I know that I did think about nature a lot because of where the cult is located. It's in we know it's kind of like in the woods at upstate, and um, the philosophy of the cult obviously means they're kind of in touch with nature and the animal realm around them, but they're also kind of fighting it all the time because they're trying to live in the woods, and there's a whole thing we find out there's coyotes, and it's a whole problem. And I also wanted to give it this sort of essential timeless sense. So for example, there's some biblical metaphors or references in the book. I'm a lapsed Catholic, but I remember a lot of the Bible. So the contemporary timeline, the chapters are headed, the fourth day, the fifth day, the sixth day. That was a reference to that part of the Bible where the world is created, and in the book things unlock on the seventh day, and that's not an accident, and so there was that sort of part of sort of that metaphysical aspect to it, which I think feeds into what you just said. And this was also a book where I reflected a lot about the pain people go through and how it metabolizes into the pain that they end up inflicting on others. And similarly, an animal being injured is usually going to be defensive and aggressive and a danger, a menace. So I think those parallels kind of establish themselves in that way.
I absolutely love that you pointed out the biblical reference of the days because that didn't click for me. It did. I was looking, I was like, that's a really interesting way to count down or describe something. And you said that and it clicked, and I was like, exactly. And you really brought that spiritual essence to the book, which was awesome.
Thank you. Well, and there's another thing too, which is the first chapter that is set in the cult. The first sentence is, in the beginning, there was Emil, and Emil is the cult leader. And that's also biblical. So all those years of religious education were not completely lost on me.
And you know what else struck me too is this idea of if you can reduce the Bible down to 4 words. Your book actually followed that structure of creation, violation of creation, redemption, and then restoration.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
that's
we
a
don't want
good
to give
point.
away,
See?
and
Yeah.
I don't want to give away anything in the book, but we see that progression. And again, your book is expertly plotted. I mean, it moves along, which is actually phenomenal about this book. But it raises all of these bigger thought-provoking questions for a reason, because at its heart, it does deal with sin, right?
Yes, exactly.
So
That's a great way of putting it. I might actually have to steal that.
you do that. Well, I want to ask you then a little bit about something that we kind of referenced very generally, and that is Frida and Gabriel. I'm not going to give away too much about their relationship, but I want to focus on them for a second because they did experience a cult together as young people, and they were trauma bonded. And, at some point, it's not a secret, Gabriel does fall under suspicion for murder, and Frida stands by him. She knows him on every level. She stands by him, stands by him. But then, as evidence mounts, she starts to have a few questions, a little bit of some misgivings. And it's very interesting because they are loyal, you think, unto the end. And then we've got this interruption here. And I was wondering if you could address that, because I think a lot of us wonder, what is our breaking point of trusting someone when we think we know them really well?
Well, that's a very interesting point to explore, right? Because it was something that I had to reckon with when I was trying to write this novel and figure out what was going on between those two. And first of all, Frida and Gabriel came from a place where, as a reader, as a movie watcher, as a TV viewer, I've always loved stories of people who feel this connection to each other, this draw, but it's a connection that doesn't fit into any of the formats that society offers us. And they, for various reasons that are explored in the book, fit that bill. But also, when I was coming up with this novel, I thought, well, I'd like to set it in this beautiful hotel in the desert in Utah. And I would like it to be a story where a contemporary crime causes secrets to resurface and causes the characters to revisit a past that they tried to leave behind. And then they find out they can't outrun it. And I thought, okay, if someone fell under suspicion for murder and it were someone you love, sure, at first it would be hard to believe, right? Because it's someone you love. We always think we know the people we love. But also, we're starting to understand, I think, collectively that we don't know, right? Like everyone is someone. Everyone who commits a crime is loved by at least one person. And so I think we're starting to understand, or at least as an author, in terms of what I explore in my work, I've started to establish that loving someone doesn't mean they didn't do the bad thing, right? And so I needed to give Gabriel and Frida a very particular bond, and that would that would mean that for Frida, renouncing Gabriel would mean the end of her world. And I thought, well, if she'd grown up into a cult together, and that would create that kind of bond. So that's why she has that loyalty to him. But then, as we see in the book, even that is not limitless, because I think there comes a point, and it's in the intersection of facts and morality. At some point, you have to open your eyes to reality. You have to accept the truth. You have to tell the truth. You have to, and so I tried, when I listen to true crime and you always hear about the people who should have known, I always have so much empathy for them because no one knows until it really hits you in the face, the truth.
Yeah.
And then it's a really painful reckoning. But that I tried to create an architecture where it was both really high stakes for Frida to accept and admit the truth, but also it would take her some time.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because the a breach in their relationship occurred when secrets crept in. And that
Yeah.
was such a cool thing that you wove into there, but we could spend a
Thank
whole hour talking on that alone.
Thank you. Yes, secrets are interesting, aren't they? They tend to. I was talking about that the other day. I was at a panel at the Montreal Mystery Festival, and we were talking about secrets. And I think a good secret in fiction is a secret where if it gets revealed, it's the end of the world, right? It has to be that big.
I agree.
So you wrote a line in the beginning of your book that stuck with me. We're all braver in the morning. And it reminded me of just it's so many things. And like I said, it just stuck with me throughout the story. And specifically, it reminded me of an old adage of the like nothing good happens after midnight. So your character is met with this situation, fighting couple, and she's kind of wrestling with whether or not she wants to step in or say anything or, just kind of dissipate what was going on. And it opened a door for a character to experience almost like regret. But before she even knows that anything is going on, she's kind of just saying like, hands off, and we're all braver in the morning. Maybe I'll say something then. So I know in my question I wrote, what is it about the cover of darkness that perpetuates a fear and wrongdoing? But I also am curious at what point the potential for regret actually causes people to act in the moment when they see something, like where's that line for people?
Yeah, that's a really good point. First of all, that line "we're all braver in the morning" is totally me projecting my own things onto the narrative. I'm a morning person. I'm quite useless after a certain time at night, and I've always felt um, I wake up a different person than when I go to bed. I am so much more positive and energized and just braver in the morning. And then at night, it's, oh my God, everything is the end of the world and we're not going to figure it out. And it's too overwhelming. And that's probably why I go to bed. And, but I think there's really something to that. I sleep on issues a lot. Like just don't even try to solve it. Just wait one night. And the wisdom you gain overnight is quite incredible. So I think that came from that. Um, it was interesting that chapter, that opening actually came during edits. And like you said, it puts Frida in a situation where she has to make a choice. And that's always what's most interesting in fiction. Ideally, your protagonist always needs to be making a choice. And that choice needs to have consequences. And in this case, she sees a woman having a fight with her husband, and she has to decide whether or not to intervene. And the fight's a little violent. She can tell there's a nastiness to it. And it just immediately ties her to what happens after, because that fight has consequences. And Frida's going to feel a sense of responsibility, and she's probably going to regret not intervening. And so it's going to make her feel bonded to that woman's destiny and to what happened to her. It is interesting, right? Like it is possible that she wishes she had realized I should intervene now because if I don't, I might regret it. And I think it's something that you learn to do in life as you grow older and as you have those experiences where maybe you don't do something and you later wish you had, or you do something and you later wish you hadn't. I think you kind of get to know yourself and you get to know your threshold. But the thing with Frida is she's been isolated from the world a lot. And in being isolated from the world, she's been isolated from herself. She hasn't had to make that many decisions. Some of them were really important ones. But then, we know she had this kind of small world, small family unit. She works for herself, by herself. I actually don't know how many dilemmas, aside from a couple of really big ones we know about from the get-go, she's had to face. So I don't think she has practice. I don't think she's really built that muscle fully. And that certainly is something she needs to learn to do in the course of the book.
That is an interesting assessment, and it makes me wonder if, when she went through so much in her life in the cult, and no one stepped in to
Yeah.
save them and to, maybe get in between a punishment or anything like that. So maybe she kind of felt like that's just not her, not her place.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think she's seen it modeled too much for her, like what it looks like to stand up for somebody. And also, she does mention, right? We know this is like in the first few pages, so it's not really a spoiler. Like the cult she grew up in, there was abuse going on of the physical and mental and moral abuse, certainly of the kids. They were not taken care of well. And when they tried to seek help, they were severely reprimanded. And I think she draws a parallel between herself as a child and this woman under duress, where she thinks, well, I used to get into trouble when I sought outside help. And probably this woman will get into trouble if I try to help her, which I do think is something you can feel sometimes. Like, haven't we been there where you see a situation and there's something wrong there and you want to intervene, but you also don't want to make it worse? Like, it can backfire. Those are really tough calls.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I love the character of the woman who worked in a pharmacy who had to also weigh that decision of how far do I go? What do I do? And I won't give away a spoiler, but stuff happened to her. And so maybe
Oh,
that was
yes, yes,
ingrained in Frida's mind. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, exactly.
I want to ask you too about this theme of power that was running through your story because several men in the story are just trying to assert their power over others, right? We had Emil, the cult leader, Mr. Brenner, the husband of the woman who was murdered. And I want to ask you about this. Is power always about money or, wanting to control others? Or do you think that people who are exhibiting some of these traits are trying to heal something within themselves?
I think people really reveal themselves when they start having power. It's really telling to see what they do with it and
Yeah.
also what they do to acquire it. I've often thought, I studied political science in college, and I've often thought, the problem is probably the people who seek power, or the people who don't want it are probably the people who should have it, right?
Yeah.
Um, Maybe we should just get to call on somebody and just give them the power, even though they don't want it. But it's always interesting to see what someone does with their power once they have it. And I don't think that it's necessarily a corrupting force. Like, I think we see people do wonderful things once they have a voice and a platform and some agency. And we see so many people who work to help others or uplift them and be a force of good. So I don't think power has to be a bad thing. However, it can often be. And I do think that, especially in the world of crime fiction, for me, something that I keep going back to and I'm endlessly captivated by is, the people who acquire power for the wrong reasons and who 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 handle it in a way that hurts others. And, you know, very often when you look at people who act cruelly towards others or who sort of seek to dominate them in this really toxic way, you will find some manner of personal trauma, right? Um, the Quiet Tenant, my previous book, is a serial killer novel, and I don't say a whole lot about the serial killer's background in it. But whenever I'm asked about it, I say, usually with serial killers, they don't have happy childhoods, right? Like, you look into serial killer, you don't find the story of a happy childhood. Having said that, not everyone who has a bad childhood ends up murdering multiple people. And I think that's a good illustration of, we always say hurt people hurt people. Yes, that is true. I say this from a place of empathy, though not sympathy, right? Like, I don't think it excuses the bad behavior. I don't think it makes it okay. But certainly it's something that I explore a lot in my fiction, right? Of how someone's own issues uh, causes them to make those issues other people's problem.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the reasons why we enjoy your writing because you explore and you allow readers to kind of take it in a direction of, gee, as a society, do we need to do better? Do we intervene? Because I thought that that was a larger theme here, and that is, as a society, do we intervene?
Well, that is something I ended up having to wrestle with some pretty big themes because I was partly writing about a cult. And I didn't
Yeah.
realize at first I just wanted to write about a cult because I find cults interesting. And that's about as much as I thought about it when I started writing. And then as I did more research and I watched documentaries and I read books, I realized that I have I had to cults the same reaction I had to serial killers when I first found out they existed, which was like cults and serial killers are not things that as a young person I thought would happen, but then I found out and I thought, oh, of course.
Yeah.
Like it makes sense that those things would happen as like weird offshoots of the world as it is. And with cults, I thought, well, it occurred to me that they are basically a predatory offshoot of this project we're all involved in together, which is trying to exist together as a massive group of people, which is really difficult. It's hard enough as it is, but then cults make a predatory exercise out of it. And so, yeah, I had to, it was, when you're writing about a cult, you're writing about the collective and organizations and what is a society, because they're kind of like alternate societies unto themselves. So I ended up having to wrestle into some pretty big things while still, like you said, making it a crime story with a plot.
Yeah.
A lot of that came in edits.
Yeah. And I love what you just said too, because it goes back to that theme of there's some violation of the natural order of things, a violation of creation. And
A
we
deviation.
exactly, deviation's good. And what do we get? Serial killers, cult leaders, these narcissists who are out to dominate and control. It's really good. Your book is just awesome. Well,
Thank you.
we've loved talking about it. I know Julia had a burning question
Oh,
before we let you
yes.
go.
So I know this is, not even out yet, so not to rush you, but if you have anything you're willing to share with our listeners about what's coming up next, we would love to hear and so we can get it on our radar.
Oh, thank you so much for asking. So my my mind right now is split into two. It's launching Our Last Resort and I'm working on the next thing. In terms of Our Last Resort, I actually just announced this morning that I'm going to be going on tour for 2 weeks in July, starting on the week of July 7th, because the book comes out July 8th. But I'm actually launching on July 7th in New York City, and then there's a whole thing. So the whole tour itinerary is on my website. And then I am not rushing, but I am hurrying up to finish a draft of the next book before I head out on tour. Although we'll see if I make that deadline. But I'm so excited about it. It's been so fun to work on. Um, it will still be a thriller. It'll still be psychological suspense. I'm putting into it a lot of my own personal obsessions, and I think that's about all I can say right now because so much will change in edits. It always does for me.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah, thank you.
we love hearing what's coming next. So we of course want you back on the show. And we appreciated your nice comments about our questions. We do read every word. And I think that makes for such a great discussion with the author because there's so much going on in your mind as you're writing. And we kind of want to dive into that. And I want to tell our listeners how to get in touch with you and where to find the book. You're on Instagram, on X, and you have a newsletter on your website. It's Clemence Michallon com, and I'm going to spell it Michallon so they can find you, connect with you, and absolutely buy this book. We wish you all the best on your tour, and thank you so much for coming on, Clemence. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks again for your great questions. This is actually one of my first interviews talking about Our Last Resort. And this was such a treat and such a great way to work through a lot of the big themes and organize my thoughts about the book. So thank you so much. This was excellent.
It was. You have a great day.
You too. Take care.
That was lovely.
Yeah,
Good
that absolutely
conversation.
was such a cool discussion. There's so much going on in your mind while you're reading this book, even though it's written very conversationally, very straightforwardly. It's
Yes,
what she is tackling that is so deep here. And these characters are very deep.
it
Also
is.
thoroughly entertaining.
I know. It was twisty.
It
And,
was.
we've had a couple twisty books on here that have just kind of, drawn me right in and given us a lot to talk about. And this is definitely one of them.
Well, I want to tell our listeners about some upcoming authors. We've got a very long list, but we've got Maggie Stiefvater with The Listeners, Chanel Cleeton, The Lost Story of Eva Fuentes, Caroline Fraser with Murderland, Susan Wiggs, Wayward Girls, Christina Baker Klein, and Ann Burt with Please Don't Lie. And several of those authors are returning for their second time. We just love talking to them. Elma Katsu with Fiend. And we continue to grow every week because you're tuning in. We are grateful, and we ask that you spread our links in all of those social media contacts because we love it. We are on BOOKSTORMPodcast.com. You can find us on Instagram, on X. We're on YouTube. Just search Bookstorm and Podcast. We'll come right up. And again, we know why you're tuning in because we're bringing you the very best authors here on Bookstorm Podcast.
All right. You want to stop recording?